Who are Washington's most intriguing players and coaches to watch for in 2024?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson here inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Make sure you check out all of our written work in their respective locations. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So, Lars, we want to have a little bit of fun. You know, we still got some time before spring ball kicks off, and we want to just kind of hand out some, so for lack of a better term, Valentines, where it's, okay, these are the guys that we're looking for, that we really want to watch in 2024, because you can say that about the majority of the roster, right? Where, you know, there's a whole lot of guys coming out, a whole lot of guys coming in, and there's a lot to watch. So who are some of these? I with my list, I stuck to some of the unproven guys that are young or getting their first opportunity to start on this roster. Who's your first one that you really want to watch in 2024?
I'm going to go back to one that we talked more about last year than this past season, and it's not necessarily one that was because of this new staff, but I think because of the players that have departed, Denzel Boston is really that kind of next guy up. Because yes, you have Jeremiah
Hunter. That was
Hunter,
my first one too,
and we can honestly both talk about it, because I think it's kind of good to balance that. You know, it's almost like Jalen Polk in 22 is what I expect Denzel Boston to be in 24, right? Where like that might be like his floor, right? Just where it's like he's not going to be maybe 1,000-yard receiver, because you should have Giles Jackson, you should have Jeremiah Hunter. So Denzel should probably be in that 600 to 800 range, right? Where he's getting, and then in 25, when whoever the quarterback is, or whether it's Damon or whatever, he's got a whole year of reps with him. And then he has his Roman Dunze or Jalen Polk in 23 year, where he really goes over 1,000 yards and really kind of cements himself as an all-around receiver. But I think this is an important year for Denzel, because he's going to get plenty of snaps now. I think that's the key thing, right? Where Jeremy Bernard leaves, Rome and the trio leaves. So now it's like, okay, they only really brought in one guy, and it was Jeremiah Hunter. Giles Jackson, kind of, they play different roles. So it's like Giles could be in the room or not in the room. Denzel's role doesn't change, because I think Giles is the X factor who can do many different things. But having Denzel in that, 6'2", 6'3", 6'1", I'd probably say 6'2", just to be safe, but really kind of does have that NFL Jalen Polk type body, where if he could have that Roman Dunze offseason like Rome had before 23, where he got bigger, right? He kind of added some muscle. He was able to get and maybe break that extra year instead of waiting until 25 to be that 1,000-yard receiver. If he can add a significant amount of muscle this coming offseason from now until, let's just say September, just through fall camp, even, where that will make him separate between how many more catches Giles Jackson gets and how much of a role Denzel plays. Because if Denzel is playing lights out and playing like Jalen Polk did in 23, it's going to be hard to not, if you're Will Rogers or whoever the quarterback is, say, hey, I mean, I got Jeremiah on one side, but I mean, you got the other guy, right, Denzel, over there. So having both of them is key.
No, absolutely. We're having both of them is really nice. And as you said with Denzel, he's got all the measurables. He's got the athletic profile where, we've seen him running some deep routes when it comes to spring ball last year. We saw him make a lot of plays in fall camp. And then, of course, with everybody else in front of him, there just wasn't really an opportunity for him to get a ton of snaps. So he's really promising, and he's got all those exciting features that you look for. And having a veteran guy like Will Rogers could help him see a lot of targets, because, he's going to have to find some guys to trust outside of Jeremiah Hunter. And Denzel just kind of seems like that really nice X option on the other side of the field, where he's going to find a way to be utilized. But another guy that I'm really a huge fan of and want to see play a big role this season be Guard Memoir, where another guy we've talked about a lot. So, and we're getting to some guys that we haven't really, but that's one where I'm just really intrigued to see what he's going to do, because he was on track to start most likely at left guard and would have been a very key role of an excellent offensive line last season. So if he can find a way to stay healthy and get on the field in an offensive line that is still looking for bodies and still looking for pieces, where Jedd Fisch did say he's probably not going to participate in spring practice, but if he can continue to get healthy and then over the summer and just kind of rehab, and maybe into the fall, he can find a way to start for a starting spot or to fight for a starting spot where it's going to be tough. But if he can get to that point, then he could end up being a really solid player along the interior. So Lars, let's move on there. Who else do you have that you're really looking for?
So it's going to be tough because it's going to fall into the Denzel Boston of 23 strap. But I'm really intrigued to see what Trey Rogers does because he, went in the portal, announced he was coming back. Again, he did come back, right? Because I feel like Tybo's been I swear I had to actually double check that a couple of times.
No, he came back, yeah.
So I think that's kind of when you look at the running back room, it's so stacked, right? But Tybo, the fact that he was able to kind of separate from even some of the, Sam Adams and so Richard Newton kind of separated from him for a different reason, just because the injury history of Bridge kind of caught up to him and things like that.
Yeah.
But Tybo, I think again, almost similar to Denzel, if he can get just a little bit bigger and pick up this offense pretty quickly, and that's the other thing is he's now almost a freshman in this offense, right? Where you have Jonah Coleman ahead of him, you have Cam Davis ahead of him, you have Will Nixon, I believe, right, for the time being, ahead of him.
Sure.
Sam Adams is still on the roster, and so maybe a third coaching staff gives Sam Adams another chance. But with that being said, I think Tybo kind of possesses the most upside of the younger guys long term, and it would allow also Adam Muhammad to kind of just get that Tybo year last year, or maybe he gets in 3 or 4 games, but isn't necessarily called upon to be that emergency back when somebody else goes down.
Right. So one guy that I also think that really needs to be kept on, just keep an eye on through. He's an early enrollee, true freshman, is Decker DeGraaf at tight end, where I really like his game. His high school film is excellent, and it's something where it felt like there was going to be a role for him no matter what as a true freshman, even under Kalen DeBoer's staff, where there was Josh Cuevas still around and everything like that. Where it still felt like he was going to play some kind of hand, even when Trey Moore came in, and Decker, now that there are only 3 scholarship tight ends on the roster, when you look at some of the other guys in the room where Ryan Otten's unproven, where he's had the injuries, he's had just so many other things go on where he hasn't been able to get on the field. And then Quentin Moore, who's been utilized mainly as a blocker for his entire Husky career. So assuming somebody else is going to be brought in the spring, even then there's still going to be a role for Decker DeGraaf where he's big, he's physical, he's really strong. And I don't know if he'll turn into, like, let's just call him Tanner McLaughlin in Arizona, where that's just kind of what we know about what Jedd Fisch likes to do with tight ends and how he wants to utilize them in the offense, where he doesn't have that same profile where McLaughlin's 6'6", 6'7". But having a guy like that who can just be a nice security blanket over the middle of the field, run some deeper routes, and just be a reliable target is something that Will Rogers is still desperately going to need. And somebody is going to have to emerge at that position. So why not Decker? Because Jedd Fisch wants to play true freshman anyways.
I completely agree about Decker, but I will say put a little respect on Quentin Moore's name because he did make probably the most.
Oh, I love Quentin Moore.
Catch.
Yeah.
No. I'm not saying. I'm saying the most significant catch being in the Pac-12 championship game to
absolutely.
Washington. So like the one time he's called upon, he's delivered. So we do know he is in an emergency case dependable. But another name I want to go back to the offensive line because when we go think about, at least I'm going to say offensive players to watch with in parentheses spring ball especially is Elijah Jaquette. How much bigger can he get between the end of last season and the beginning of spring ball, and then how much can he utilize not having a lot of numbers along the offensive line to his advantage? Because this is former 4-star Scott Huff obviously loved him, decided to at least stick around with Brendan Carroll for a reason, right? Because Brendan Carroll is a pretty well regarded offensive line coach. Similar to almost Sharon Moore, right? Where it's like, hey, he got a head coaching job in part, not just because he's a good offensive coordinator, but because of the way he builds his offense, which is from the front back, right? If you're going to replace anybody with Scott Huff, you can't do much better than Brendan Carroll, right? You're not going to do as good as Scott Huff, but Brendan and Scott are almost, in a way, I believe Brendan Carroll is younger than Scott Huff. Scott Huff seems young, but he is also old. So it's kind of like, almost getting like the perfect replacement for Scott Huff, right? Where the offensive line scheme is not going to be that much different. So these guys, guard in particular, and Elijah Jaquette, are all going to should be able to pick up this scheme pretty quickly, at least, just because that's kind of what's similar to what Washington ran last year under Ryan Grubb. But the question is, with the limited number of offensive linemen that UW is going to have in spring ball, which some of these younger, redshirt freshmen and sophomore offensive linemen are really going to get the chance to pop. And I think Elijah Jaquette could be one of those guys that takes advantage of that.
Lars, let's jump over to the defensive side. right after we send a message to our good friends over at Game Time. Because with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Some of the coolest things about Game Time are the last minute deals, the flash deals, the zone deals, all kinds of deals on the app. And it's so easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Views from your from every single seat in the venue help you know that you're getting the best deal, and you can just see exactly what you're going to be sitting before you buy. And Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you that complete peace of mind with your purchase. All in prices show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users can get $20 off with code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So Lars, let's jump right over on to the defense. And one guy that I want to start with is he's definitely not unproven, but he's new to Washington, so it's a little bit of a cheat. And I'm sure I feel like I know where you're going to go with this one too. So I'm going to take Ephesians Prysock because I there's nothing I love more than a long corner in that Keith Taylor, Kevin King mold, where having those kinds of guys that can suffocate receivers on the outside and just play physical press coverage at the line of scrimmage. That's something that Prysock does very, very well. Our good buddy Ben Glassmeyer wrote a lot about that over on Huskies Wire. And it's something that we haven't necessarily seen play a prevalent role in this defense for a while, where Keith Taylor being the last one, where Jordan Perriman struggled with injuries and we never really got to see his full potential. But there's so much to like about Prysock's game. And that's somebody who now under Steve Belichick, who has a really great history with those long corners, especially when you watch what first round pick Christian Gonzalez did with the Patriots before he got hurt this past season. It's really nice to see because he likes to let those guys thrive in man coverage, where he just says, yeah, I trust you. We're going to run the majority of the scheme. Just doing anything else. You don't need to worry about anything except that guy across from you. That's it. Just play man. We'll figure the rest out. And I really like the way that he does that, because not only does it allow corners to play fast and free and loose, but it lets those guys do what they want to do, which is just play on an island.
Exactly. I mean, I was honestly, as you were talking, I was like, you know what? To answer this question easily, I would just say, just give me a dart. I'm not even going to look at the dart, but I'm just going to throw it at the defensive back room and just like pick any one of those guys. They're all going to get better. And so, like, and not only with Steve Belichick, but with John Richardson as well, which we'll talk about in the next segment. But to your point, I'm going to, I think, probably take the next obvious one and be Sebastian Valdez along the defensive line.
Oh, I see. I thought all right. You saved another great one for me. All right, please continue. Sorry.
Because as great as cornerbacks can be, and you can try and lock down and do whatever, but if that quarterback is sitting back there for 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, or you're getting run over like you did against Michigan in the national, which again, to be fair, Michigan basically had if UW doesn't win the Joe Moore Award, they win it again for a third straight year. So you're going against a really good offensive line, one, and then two, some pretty darn good running backs. I mean, in all sense, Blake Corbin and Donovan Edwards, but in order to, and when you're going into the Big Ten next year, where does everything start? Whether Kalen DeBoer said it or Jedd Fisch said it, it starts up front. And it's getting Sebastian Valdez to stay in the fold. I know it's like a 1-year rental, but that allows guys like Javon and Armon Parker to continue to develop under Jason Kafusi, right? They could take their next step and do whatever, but everything starts with it's almost like Eddie with the linebackers last year, right? Where you have that 6th-year guy that just kind of anchor at the top, right? Where Sebastian Valdez, although doesn't have the history in the program, serves as that anchor where you can just plug and play him. I would be very surprised if he's not one of your starters, just based on his experience and impact. And I think not only as a run stuffer, but just an all-around interior defensive lineman, that's what kind of Washington didn't necessarily have on both elements, right? The pass rush and the run stuffer. They kind of had one or the other. They didn't always necessarily have a mixture of both.
So I agree with you there, and that's kind of why I wanted to, and where I thought you were going to go first was Zach Durfee, because he's kind of I feel like one of the obvious picks for this one, where he's still technically very unproven at the Power 5 level, and he's somebody who we've heard all about his athleticism. We've seen him play in practice, and we really like everything we've seen. So I want to keep this short because we all know what the Durfee conversation is because we've had it time and time again, as the Everdares know. So having that conversation about Durfee, just rehashing it, it's not necessarily very necessary, but still making sure that you note that this is a guy who could be a really big part of this defensive line in 2024. And if he lives up to his potential, we saw him a little bit in the Sugar Bowl, a little bit in the national championship, and it's okay. Yeah, we see that this guy is coming along and there's a lot to like. We just now want to see it over a full season, which again, wanted to make sure we got his name in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, that name really didn't cross my mind. Oh, no disrespect to Durfee. I'm more or less just thinking, okay, well, Zach, he is kind of in that interesting spot where it's like we know what he can be. And it's almost in the same way, I guess you can make the argument about Sebastian Valdez, right? Coming from a lower level, can he make the transition or is he Jordan Perryman? I guess to be fair, remains to be seen. But I do think they both can kind of have that impact. Another one that I'm intrigued to see, we probably know Carson Bruner and Alfonso Tuputala are probably your starting linebackers. I would just maybe not, but just to kind of pencil in at this point. So looking at the younger linebackers, I'm thinking Devin Bryant. It's kind of a toss-up between Bryant and Jordan Whitney, but I think of the overall package, I would take Devin Bryant. And that's no slight to Jordan Whitney. I just think one of those two is going to get an increased amount of playing time this year. And it's probably going to start on special teams, which I believe is where Jordan Whitney actually played some time last year. So it'll be interesting to see which one kind of emerges. And the good thing about it is also Steve Belichick does have some experience coaching special teams, right? So, with Jordan Palpa being the special teams coordinator, I believe, right?
Yep.
Then I'm sure, he no doubt will ask Steve Belichick, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Or, hey, since you're the defensive coordinator, who can I use on my special teams unit as gunners, right? Who are some up-and-coming linebackers or guys, on cornerbacks? Like, that's why getting an NFL mind to pair with a guy that is willing to play a number of different players, that's what makes good teams great, is all that competition, all those young guys. You can just keep turning out young bodies. And so I'm going to bet I'm going to take stock in Devin Bryant, but I'm hedging also like Jordan Whitney. I'm not saying it's like head and shoulders one is better than the other, because I just think Devin Bryant, if I have to pick an overall linebacker to emerge, it would be him just based on what he possesses.
So I've got one more young guy that I want to talk about, that another guy who you and I discussed a lot in fall camp last year, and that's Lance Holtzclaw, where you're going to be looking for guys to step up, right? Where Russell Davis and Isaiah Ward have come in. That's really nice. Those are guys who've played a lot and can definitely add a boost, but you're still going to be looking for some of these guys that are still on the roster to take that step forward. And we saw Lance be really impressive. And it's something where we know one of the big reasons that he didn't necessarily get that big jump last year is he still needs to put on weight, where he wants to get up to 245, 250, somewhere around there. And he was sitting somewhere around 235 last season. So if he can continue to gain weight, so we can add power and do all these other things with his frame, he's going to see a big jump in playing time, because we saw the athleticism. We saw the continued development of his pass rush moves, which under Jason Kaufusi should continue to move up. And then now having Steve Belichick is really helpful, where he did a fantastic job in New England, especially with guys like Josh Uche, who's going to get a big free agent contract here in the next couple of weeks. So he is going to develop the right way. We know that from the guys that are in the room. So the question is, can he just find a way to stand out, where he's got all the tools to do it? And now it's about taking that jump forward. And because like I just said, we've seen it before, and now it's time for, okay, Braylon Trice and ZTF were there. We brought in Zach Durfee because we can't pass on a guy with that kind of talent. Voit Tanufi has always been somebody who has been really productive whenever he's on the field, but his size has kind of required to move to the outside. So he kind of got buried on the depth chart a little bit. And while there's still a lot of bodies in that room, now is the time for him to step up and say, no, I belong in this rotation and I deserve a spot.
No, I completely agree. And I think that one more to kind of full circle this back to where you started would be one of, again, that's kind of keeping the theme with what I just said with the linebackers and bringing it back to what I said even in the beginning, throw a dartboard, pick one of the three redshirt freshman cornerbacks, Curly Reed, Leroy Bryant, Caleb Presley. Of those three, Curly looks to the one that's like just built the best. I do think Leroy Bryant might end up being the best out of the three. But again, I think one of those three is going to emerge and get more playing time. Sure, I know it's a crowded room with Devon Banks, but injuries always happen. And I'm not saying that just in Devon's case, but I think there's so much talent in that core that one of those guys is going to pop, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's Leroy Bryant.
No, I agree. His athleticism and his ball skills are definitely very intriguing. And that, with that being said, let's move on to some position coaches. right after we send a message to our good friends over at FanDuel, because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. All you have to do is just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So, Lars, let's jump over to the position coaches. And one guy who you mentioned, and so I'm just going to let you start with him, is John Richardson, the secondary coach.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to reserve my, feelings here, but just and the reason why is because to be fair, we haven't had a chance to meet these coaches in person. Obviously, I have a relationship with Jordan Papa, the tight ends coach, when he was on Chris Peterson's staff, and I got to know Jordan pretty well. But with that being said, I think John Richardson reminds me of what Jimmy Lake started out being at Washington, right? We're a guy that's just proven wherever he's been, he has developed cornerbacks at a high level. And I mean, you look at who he got at Arizona, where he was able to pull Ephesians Prysock and Tacario Davis in the same class, and then develop both of them into probably two of the top, 6-8 quarterbacks in the Pac-12.
Sure, yeah.
And that's just being safe to kind of, off the top of my head, I might be missing a few guys and whatnot. And that was at Arizona, right? Now, when you go back and look at the history of Washington, and John Richardson can kind of lean on Budda Baker to come back and lean on some of these other guys, Trent McDuffie to come back, right? And say, hey, these guys, Kyler Gordon, another one, right, who's come back multiple times since being drafted by the Chicago Bears, where all these guys, whether in state or not, have a history with Washington. John Richardson's almost got a history to live up to, and he comes in with a pretty good track record. So I think, especially after what kind of has transpired over the past couple of years, where again, you got three pretty good cornerbacks, and Vincent Holmes now as a receiver. You got some good pieces, but none of them truly ever got coaching or developed in their past year and a half, 2 years at Washington.
Sure.
So now, not only with Steve Belichick and all these other coaches, but I think John Richardson specifically with the cornerbacks, I think, it's almost why Elijah Jackson stuck around, where it's like, okay, well, I could have just gone somewhere else. Mish Powell, you understand it, because I believe Jaden Wayne still is at Miami, so I can kind of see that former, in-state connection down there and whatnot. And it's for 1 year. But Elijah, I think he kind of has always wanted to be like, hey, I want to be the Keith Taylor. I want to be the guy that holds up the tradition. And now I have a perfect position coach to help me get to that high level.
No, I agree with you there. I really like what John has done. And there's just something to be said about, I know I talked about a little bit earlier, just that prototype, like that big, long cornerback, where when you follow the recruitment process of Dijon Lee, he fits into that mold so perfectly, where it's just all really intriguing to see how that plays out. And then you look at Tacario Davis as well, like you just talked about, where just having those guys and just seeing what he's been able to do with them. And you go back to his time at Washington State with Jalen Watson. I know we talked about it on yesterday's show, but those are all things you can point to say, this guy is a really good developer. Now let's see what he can do. Whereas, as Armand Hawkins pointed out on Twitter, where let's see what he can do with some of these big fish now. If he can get these 4 and these 5-star guys, what else can you do? Like what's the next level for you, where it feels like he still has a lot of potential that he hasn't. I don't want to say he hasn't tapped into it, but just with guys that he can work with to just see how high he can bring them. And with that being said, I wanted to talk about wide receivers coach Kevin Cummings, where another guy that you and I both had a really great relationship with was wide receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard. And we love Shep. He did a fantastic job helping develop Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Jeremy Bernard, Denzel Boston. The list goes on of the guys that he helped develop. And another person who did a really fantastic job with that is Kevin Cummings when he was down in Arizona, where, I can sit here and talk to you for 10 minutes about everything he did with Tyrone McMillan and how impressive that was. But with Tyrone McMillan, it's okay. Yeah. He's a borderline 5-star kid. You want to see that development. And Kevin Cummings still did a fantastic job. I don't want to take anything away from him, but when you really look at some guys that you saw that big jump from, look at Jacob Cowing, look at Dorian Singer, where those weren't the same stratosphere of recruit as what Tyrone McMillan was. And they still turned into ultra productive players. You saw Jacob Cowing get a Senior Bowl invite. Unfortunately, he got hurt while he was there, but he's still a really impressive player, especially for his size, where he's 5'8", 5'9", and was still able to create a lot of separation, became a really, really good route runner. And look at the step back we saw Dorian Singer take after he'd left Arizona. And I don't know if you want to chalk that up to the offense, you want to chalk that up to some other things, but you have to just say, oh, he left Kevin Cummings, and then all of a sudden, so some of his production fell off, some of these other things, took a step back, where you could just point at that and just say, okay, in the same light as Jamarcus Shepard did a lot of good things at Purdue before he came to Washington, it feels like Kevin Cummings, you do the same thing coming here.
Right. And the other thing to consider with Dorian Singer is it wasn't like he went from a wide open offense to Stanford, right? Where it's like, okay, right. I can kind of see maybe why his numbers might take a little bit of a hit. No, you went to USC, Lincoln Riley, and Caleb Williams. And I mean, like, yes, they had some good receivers in that room, but could you tell me there was no Roma Dunze, there was no Jalen McMillan, there was no Jalen, Josh Washington's good, there's some other pieces in that room, right? But I think, I agree it was a little surprising to see Dorian take that dip, but again, it's a testament to Kevin Cummings. And then probably sticking with the offense, I would say Brendan Carroll, right? It's kind of an obvious one, the elephant in the room that we talked about earlier. But again, that's why when Chris Peterson replaced Chris Strasser with Scott Huff, right? I believe it was after the 2015 season, or maybe it was after 2016, right? Because he went into it was after.
Oh, it was after 2016. Yeah,
right, because it was after the CFP run, right? So that was when you saw Washington's recruitment on the offensive line go from good, right? Chris Strasser was kind of the old school, I'm the technician. I know how to develop linemen. He obviously went to go to be an assistant offensive line coach with the Indianapolis Colts, the NFL, and Denver Broncos, I believe, as well. So he obviously knew how to be a very good hands-on coach, but he wasn't necessarily a great recruiter. And then he brought in Scott Huff from Boise State, Chris Peterson did in 2017, and you just saw the recruitment go from, it was good to high end. I mean,
great.
So, right. And so, I mean, you're getting the Roger Rosengard and developing him, right? And that's the other thing. It wasn't just that he's this flashy, I can get all these 4- and 5-star guys, but they don't necessarily develop, right? And that's the other side of Brendan Carroll. And we see that right away with Jake Flores committing, right? Where Jedd Fisch gets his quarterback, and then he right away gets his offensive lineman. And Flores came up on that visit expecting to commit. Like, he was planning to commit. So it wasn't like, oh, wow, let me jump in the pan and Washington's throwing all this, NIL and stuff. It's like, no, I wanted to commit to these guys. I was so glad they went to Washington. So now it made my decision even easier. So I think Brendan Carroll, it's not just the last name, right? Just like Steve Belichick, right? It's like, oh, you see the name Belichick on an NFL, on a coaching staff. It's like, whoa, like what? It's like, but no, but he's also actually good. This isn't like a nepotism hire. This isn't, hey, we're going to give you, the John Donovan, but he's John Belichick or he's John Carroll. It's like, that's not what this is. And so I think that's just as important of a hire as any on the staff entirely.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that's a fantastic point, because it's all, look at what we did with just some of the guys he had down in Arizona, Jordan Morgan, Jonah Savaiana. There are a lot of guys where he did a really good job developing them, where he was really good at teaching them the scheme and just getting them in position to succeed, even from a very young age, where again, that's not a position that you ever really expect or even want, for the most part, true and red shirt freshmen to play, unless they're, super high level like Caden Proctor. So getting guys in that position and just showing what he's able to do with redshirt freshmen it's cool to see. But one guy that I really want to make sure we highlight on this segment is running backs coach Scotty Graham, where he's done a really great job of recruiting on social media. He's been very, very active on that front. And also the guy posted a picture yesterday, just hanging out with Method Man. Like, that's just awesome. I don't know if everybody's seen this, but that's just so cool. And there's aren't a lot of coaches that you can see just going out of their way and doing something like that, where he goes to the Super Bowl and is very active about promoting the brand, is really good at what he does, and also just happens like doing all that off the field and recruiting and doing all those sorts of things. And then you get him on the field and, oh yeah, Jonah Coleman was one of the highest graded running backs by PFF this past season. So it's not like he's any slouch on the field either. So combining that, and that's something where that position in particular, where, you can get one running back a year and call it good. And then you can have him be a secondary recruiter at wherever else, where you can have him close on, have him be a closer, just have him be just in the room as assistants for any other position. That's just an awesome guy to have around. Yeah,
I was gonna say, I'm glad you mentioned Scotty Graham, because it was kind of a toss between Brendan Carroll. I'm like, well, let me. You kind of got to mention both, right? And so, and that's why we're mentioning both, because the one thing that intrigues me about Scotty Graham, when you look into his past, he had never coached anywhere before he was in Arizona with Jedd Fisch, right? So he was a longtime NFL PA guy. But one thing I've come to learn about Scotty Graham, and to your point about him being a closer, he's a relationship guy. is pure and pure. A great coach, right? Not discredit. He's not
coach,
he's not the towel guy that also happens to be the inside plug. It's like it doesn't matter who he gets. I make a prediction right now on the show. Scotty Graham is the Jamarcus Shepard of the staff.
Okay.
And you know what that means as well as I do. Where when we get him after practice, I think we are
the energy guy, the fun quotes, yeah.
But the guy who is also just as competent as what his job is in every stretch of the right. So because some people it's like, oh, he's a great talker. He's like, yeah, but he's a terrible coach. He can't coach a game, but can't. But he's a great guy, great energy guy. You hear all the time. There's so many energy coaches. But that's why a lot of those guys are like, assistants or like,
it's a rare combination to be both. Yeah.
Right. And so, that's why you want to highlight it when it is a high end, because, you could look at this and say, oh, well, Jedd Fisch brought this guy that has no coaching experience. Yes, he's a former player and all that, but, just because you're a former player doesn't make you a great coach. Just like it's rare, but it's proven that you don't have to play football to be a good coach, right? There's some anomalies in that one as well. But having that, playing background certainly helps Scotty, but it's like, okay, this isn't Jedd just like, oh, hey, I'm bringing one of my boys, right? Or I'm bringing one of my guys, right? This isn't like, not similar to a nepotism hire, but almost like the good old boys club, right? Where it's like, no, I'm bringing a guy who I know can lock it down. If I need to go ask him to close on a guy, or I say, hey, you and me, Scotty, we're going to get Dijon. We're closing on Dijon because Alabama and Ohio
and
State,
Georgia, they're all.
Right before signing day, but you get Jedd Fisch and Scotty Graham and John Richardson and Steve Belichick in that room to close. That's over. Like that combination. And so that's the important thing about how you build a successful staff is you can't have just relationship guys or just coaches, right? You can have some guys, obviously you want those guys to be able to do both, but then you do have some guys where it's like, Vinny Sinceri, right? He'll probably be a good coach, but you're looking at him as a young former Alabama guy who knows what it takes to recruit and kind of get in some other roads that you necessarily wouldn't be able to with some other. And that's not a shot to other coaches. It's just Vinny Sinceri brings the youth, and and that's the other thing. Steve Belichick is young, but maybe he's not as relatable, right? And that's no shot to Belichick.
Sure. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And please, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you subscribe because you don't want to miss some of the fun stuff that we've got cooking for you. Just make sure you stay tuned for that. The best way to do that is just subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to hit that like button down below. Leave us a comment if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Click that bell so you never miss when we might go live for some certain things and just never miss any episode when it drops. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. It all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.